They're not going to apologise, and they're not thinking about you either, but you're still here, waiting for closure like it's coming in the post. It's not. Closure. The myth we've been sold by films and therapy culture. The idea that relationships end with a conversation. That people who hurt you will eventually realise what they've done. That there's some final scene where they look you in the eye and say, "Sorry, I was wrong, you deserved better." Absolute fantasy. Most people who hurt you will never apologise. Not because they don't understand what they did, but because they don't care, or worse, because they think they were right, and you're waiting for a moment that exists only in screenplays and your desperate imagination. Here's the uncomfortable bit. Whilst you're lying awake at 3 a.m, rehearsing what you'll say when they finally reach out, they're asleep. Whilst you're analysing every interaction, trying to understand where it went wrong, they're getting on with their life. Whilst you're waiting for closure, they've already closed the door. They're not thinking about you. They're not losing sleep. They're not wondering if they made a mistake. They've moved on, and you're still stood in the ruins of something that ended for them months ago. That's the truth you're avoiding, because accepting that they've moved on means accepting that you didn't matter as much as you thought you did, that what felt monumental to you was ordinary to them, that you were more invested in the relationship than they ever were. And that stings. So instead of accepting it, you wait. You wait for them to realise, you wait for them to miss you, you wait for them to come back and say the words that will somehow make sense of the pain. But they're not coming back, and even if they did, even if they knocked on your door tomorrow with an apology, would it actually fix anything? Would sorry undo the damage? Would it give you back the months you spent trying to understand what you did wrong? No, because closure isn't something they give you, it's something you give yourself, and you're avoiding that responsibility by pretending it's their job. One wise bloke wrote that we suffer not from the things themselves, but from our judgment about the things. You're not suffering because they won't apologise. You're suffering because you've decided their apology is necessary for your peace. It isn't. Your peace is available right now, without their apology, without their acknowledgement, without their validation. You just have to stop making them the gatekeeper of your ability to move on. But you won't, because waiting for closure gives you something to do with the pain. It gives you hope, and hope, even false hope, feels better than acceptance. Because acceptance is final. Acceptance means it's really over. Acceptance means they were exactly who they showed you they were, and you're the one who ignored it. And that's harder than waiting, isn't it? Harder than believing they'll come around. Harder than thinking there's still a chance they'll see the light and realise what they lost. They won't. They don't think they lost anything. That's why they're not apologising. Here's what closure actually is. It's not a conversation. It's not an apology. It's not an explanation. Closure is the moment you stop needing those things. The moment you realise you can move forward without them. The moment you accept that some people will hurt you and walk away without a backward glance, and that's just how it is. Closure is internal. It's not given, it's chosen, and you're choosing to wait instead of choosing to let go. Because letting go is hard. Letting go means admitting you loved someone who didn't love you back, or cared about someone who didn't care about you, or trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Letting go means accepting that you got it wrong, that your judgment was off, that you stayed longer than you should have. And all of that is embarrassing. So instead of facing it, you wait for them to validate your pain, to confirm that yes, it was real, yes, you deserve better, yes, they were wrong. But even if they did say that, even if they gave you the perfect apology, it wouldn't change what happened. It wouldn't give you back the time you wasted. It wouldn't undo the hurt. It would just be words, and you're waiting for words that won't change anything anyway. So why are you really waiting? Because you think their apology will prove something, that you weren't crazy, that you weren't imagining it, that you weren't overreacting. You want them to confirm that you were right to be hurt. But you don't need their confirmation. You were hurt. That's a fact. Whether they acknowledge it or not doesn't change that you experienced it. Your pain doesn't need their validation to be real. And here's the bit that really stings. They're probably not thinking about you because they've rationalized what they did. They've told themselves a story where they're the reasonable one, where you were too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult, where they had no choice but to leave. In their version of events, they're fine, you're the problem, and they've moved on guilt-free because they genuinely believe they did nothing wrong. So you're waiting for an apology from someone who thinks they're the injured party. You're waiting for acknowledgement from someone who's rewritten history to absolve themselves. You're waiting for closure from someone who closed that chapter without a second thought. Another philosopher said you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Every moment you spend waiting for them is a moment you're not living. You're in limbo. You're in purgatory. Not because they put you there, because you're choosing to stay there. And the worst part, they don't care that you're there. They're not flattered that you're still thinking about them. They're not touched that you're waiting. If they even know, they probably think you're pathetic. Harsh, yes. True, also yes. Because people who cared about you don't disappear without explanation. People who valued you don't leave you waiting for closure. People who respected you don't ignore your attempts to understand what happened. They just don't. So the fact that they're not apologizing, that they're not reaching out, that they're not thinking about you, that tells you everything you need to know. They didn't care. Not enough. Not in the way you needed them to. And no apology will change that fundamental truth. So what do? You give yourself the closure they never will. You sit down with yourself and you say the words you're waiting to hear. I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm sorry you didn't get the ending you deserved. I'm sorry they didn't value you the way you valued them. And then you close the door. Not because they apologized, not because you understand why it ended, but because you've decided you're not waiting anymore. You've decided that your peace matters more than their acknowledgement. You've decided that you're done giving them power over your ability to move on. That's closure, and it's available to you right now, without them, without an apology, without an explanation, without any of the things you think you need. But you have to choose it. You have to stop refreshing their social media. Stop checking if they've read your message. Stop wondering if they'll reach out on your birthday or Christmas, or the anniversary of when you met. Stop creating scenarios in your head where they finally realize and come back. They're not coming back, and even if they did, you'd still be the person who waited. You'd still be the person who gave them that much power. You'd still be the person who couldn't move on without their permission. Is that who you want to be? Because here's what happens when you stop waiting. Life gets quieter. The obsessive thoughts slow down. The pain dulls. Not because they apologized, but because you stopped feeding the wound by picking at it every day. Mentor, you start filling your time with things that actually matter instead of imaginary conversations with someone who's forgotten you exist. You start building a life that doesn't have a hole in it, shaped like their validation. You start realizing that you're actually fine without them. Better than fine, because you're no longer wasting energy on someone who isn't thinking about you. You're no longer giving your peace to someone who never deserved it in the first place. And one day, you'll realize you haven't thought about them in weeks, that the apology you were desperate for doesn't matter anymore. That closure happened without you noticing because you stopped needing it. That's how you know you're free, not because they apologized, but because you stopped waiting for them to. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. Most of the people you're waiting to hear from have no idea you're waiting. They've moved on so completely that it would shock them to learn you're still upset. To them, it's ancient history. To you, it's still an open wound. And that imbalance, that's your creation. You're keeping it alive. You're feeding it. You're choosing to stay stuck whilst they're choosing to move forward. So make a different choice. Choose to believe that you don't need their words to heal. Choose to accept that some people will hurt you and never acknowledge it. Choose to close the door yourself instead of leaving it open, waiting for them to come back through it. They're not going to apologize. They're not thinking about you. They've moved on. And the only question that matters is when will you? So tell me, what are you actually waiting for, and why? Comment below. Convince me closure is real. I dare you. Overthinking Department. Where we stop waiting for people who aren't coming. open 24/7.